So not too long ago, I discussed the first season of Cheers. I discovered Cheers this year, as it were. Fell completely in love with it. I watched it after I watched Frasier, so I kind of did it backwards. And basically, I want to discuss it today just because I love it and I want to gush about it. So while I'm probably calling this a review, it's not really a review, it's just my chance to tell you what I like and dislike. I'm not going to go too analytically deep into this, but I do love James Burrows and think he is infallible. So Cheers for me is kind of perfect. So as I did with the first season, I'm just going to kind of talk through each episode very briefly. There won't be any spoilers as such, but I will tell you what each episode is about. So if you haven't seen season 2 yet, I definitely recommend that you watch it anyway, but it's probably worth watching it before you listen to me rambling on about Cheers. So I will say that this feels very much just like a continuation of the first season. Obviously, with the first season, at least the first half of it's all about introducing characters, allowing us to get to know them more. Whereas this one, they begin to have their own stories a lot more. We're familiar with the characters, so we can explore different storylines. But we have no new permanent characters introduced, so it is more of a continuation. And with the first episode, Power Play, this picks up kind of where it ended, and we have Sam and Diane beginning to have a bit more of a relationship together. But it's not all about Sam and Diane. I mean, I will say for the most part, where I can't say what I was going to say, but for a certain length of time, for a certain number of seasons, it does feel like the Sam and Diane show. But we have episodes peppered throughout, such as the next one, which is Little Sister Don't You. This is all about Carla, and she goes into labour. And her sister Annette begins to work at the bar, and what I love about this is Annette is actually played by Rhea Perlman. So Carla isn't really in this episode very much, she's off in hospital, but Rhea Perlman is still in it as Annette, and it's so wonderful seeing her in the same show, interacting with the same people, but playing a really completely different character. It's really lovely and really creative, and I thought it was a really clever idea. Oh, I've actually just read a note at the bottom that actress Rhea Perlman actually gave birth to her child in March 1983, which is roughly when this episode aired. Episode 3 is personal business, and we have some more interaction between Diane and Carla. I think their relationship is very roller coastery. For the most part, it's very much down. But I always love seeing them interact, and as the seasons progress, it just gets more and more fascinating, and Carla's approach to Diane gets very interesting. Episode 4 is Homicidal Ham. This is with Andy, who you may remember in the first season was Diane's blind date. He is a formerly convicted criminal, and in this one they put on a performance of Othello, but things get a little bit murderous. It's a very intense episode. It really is great, and I really enjoyed it. It's very gripping, very dark. Episode 5, Sumner's Return. Sam and Diane are going to have dinner with her fiance Sumner. I feel like this might have been too soon to bring Sumner back, to be honest, because it's not even been a full season. But it's a good episode, it's enjoyable. I just feel like it could have been maybe further down the line, especially as we're really only still getting to grips with Sam and Diane as a couple. Then episode 6, Affairs of the Heart. Carla turns down a date, and we really get to see quite an emotional side of Carla here, because she has this barrier up and she doesn't like to get emotionally invested with anybody because she knows she's going to be hurt or end up pregnant. And I really kind of like the way Diane treats Carla in this one as well. I thought it was very nice, very worthy of note. And for me, I always love an episode that kind of revolves around Carla because I think she's such a brilliant character. Number 7, Old Flames. Yeah, so we have a lot more Sam here and his former baseball career, and we get to see a lot more of the athlete and sports star Sam, which is nice. That's often peppered quite a lot into the episodes, but it's very only occasionally that we get to see it in full force. There's another episode further down the line about an auction, which I really loved, and that really gave us a nice look into Sam as the former sports star. Episode 8 is also sports-based. This is Manager Coach, and Coach takes on a coaching position of the Titans, a little league team. It's so funny seeing the young children interacting with him in the way Coach sometimes responds inappropriately. It's a lot of fun. Number 9 is They Called Me Mayday, Sam Mayday Malone, and there's the potential of Sam writing an autobiography about his sports days. So despite what I've just said about that only being peppered, we have 3 consecutive sports-based episodes. But this is a really great episode. Diane gets to do some writing. Obviously, Diane being a writer, but in the first few seasons, we don't really get to see too much of it. That only picks up towards maybe season 4. 10, How Do I Lovely Let Me Call You Back? Sam tells Diane that he loves her. This is a very intense episode and kind of one of the first points during their growing relationship that we see some chaos ensuing. It's a very good episode. I think the time was fine. I think if this had been any earlier, it would have been too soon. Episode 11, Just 3 Friends. Diane's old friend Heather visits, and Sam feels like he flirts with her. No, sorry, feels like she is flirting with him, and he raises this, and it seems nonsense, and he becomes a little bit paranoid, and it's great fun to see, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. That was very much a Diane and Sam episode. Episode 12 is brilliant. So this is Where There's a Will, and this gentleman, Malcolm, is in Cheers, and he allegedly has 6 months to live. So he gives the cast, he gives Cheers a huge check, and they'll start to fight about what they should do with it, and then even if it's real, and should they believe him, or is he just fabricating these elaborate stories? It's brilliant fun, and I won't say how it ends, but I really loved the conclusion. I thought it was brilliant. Number 13 is Battle of the Exes. Carla's ex-husband is on the scene, and we get to meet Loretta, played by Jean Kasem. I'll be honest, at this point, I didn't like Loretta. I feel like the character kind of irritated me more than perhaps she should have done. I just could not get on board with Loretta. But as it progresses, actually, I really thoroughly enjoyed her as a character. Number 14, No Help Wanted. Norm is basically completely unemployed, so Sam takes him on as an accountant, and I feel like this is where Norm really comes into his stride, because he is an accountant, and we get to see Norm doing something that he knows and is good at, because up until this point, it's basically been Norm really down on his luck. But at this point, actually, Norm has his strengths, and we start to get to see them, and Norm, I think he's brilliant. Episode 15, and Coachie makes 3. Coach gate crashes Sam and Diane's romantic evening, and it's hilarious because he cannot see the wood for the trees, as it very much were. It's a fabulously funny episode, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. Number 16 is Cliff's Rocky Moment. Cliff is challenged to a fight, and Cliff, being Cliff, is not going to back down, but Cliff being Cliff, we know he is going to be brutally murdered. Obviously that's not what happens, but it's, he's probably the least likely person to get into a fight, so it's very entertaining. 17 is Fortune and Men's Weight, and in this one there's a really old fortune-telling machine in the bar, and they all try it out, and I love Carla in this, because Carla is very superstitious, and her behaviour is just really lovely in this episode. The fortune teller is actually relevant. It tells some fortunes that may or may not come true, or that cause some people to question things. And I think it plays a really interesting role in developing certain characters' approaches to one another and the way they treat their lot in life, I guess. Number 40 is Snow Job. This is another Sam and Diane episode. There's quite a bit of tension growing on. We have quite a bit of Norm in this one. It's not one of my favourite episodes, I'll be honest. I don't think it adds too much to season 'It's not a bad episode, but I feel like it could have been taken out, and I wouldn't have been any of the wiser that it had been missing. Number 19. Number 19 is really entertaining. This is Coach Buries a Grudge. His old friend T-Bone dies, so they have a memorial in the bar. But T-Bone was not the most angelic of characters, so the way this memorial progresses as other people come along is really entertaining and really quite funny, and not, it's more funny than you would expect for an episode based around a memorial. And I think, Coach is in his prime at this point. He's fantastic. Number 20, we're nearing the end, is Norman's Conquest, which I think is a brilliant title. Norman has a bit of an issue as he is worried that he will cheat on Vera. And obviously Vera is a prominent absence in Cheers, and as a viewer, you do not want him to do that. You do not want him to betray his wife, who we know he loves. And it's a very heart-racing episode and a very intense episode. And it really shows Norm in such a wonderful way when we see his emotions coming out and his dilemmas. And I love Norm. Norm is my favourite character in Cheers without question. And I just think it's a really great episode. The last episodes it's actually a two-parter. It's I'll Be Seeing You, part 1, and part 2. This, it's a Sam and Diane finale, and it's all about various problems that Sam and Diane are encountering, and will they, won't they, will they, won't they, will they stay together, will they not? I'm not going to tell you how it concludes, but it's a fine two-parter, but for me, I never feel like the whole Sam and Diane thing was at the center. While it's at the center of a lot of the storylines, I find the elements that happen around them to be a lot more interesting. And, what happens to Cliff and Norm and Carla and, later as we progress to the other characters. But it's interesting. It's still interesting. Was it the conclusion I expected for season 2? In a way, yes, maybe, perhaps. Is it the most powerful ending? No, not at all. But I did thoroughly enjoy it. So, please let me know what you think of it. If you have any particularly strong opinions about season 2, Ted Danson, Shelley Long, Nicholas Colasanto, Rhea Perlman, John Ratzenberger, and George Wendt all are fabulous. I think they're brilliant. Do I prefer this to season 1? I guess kind of, yeah. I feel like the episodes that are strong are really strong. As I said, there are a couple of weak links about which I'm not overly bothered, but the ones that I love, I really love, and the character developments, particularly for Carla and Norm. Didn't really get too much of Cliff here, but particularly for Carla and Norm, I thought were great. What happens to Sam and Diane after this is pretty interesting, but I'll talk about that in season 3. Let me know your thoughts on season 2. If you haven't seen Cheers, please make it the next TV show you watch. James Burrows is perfection. This show is incredible.